My father, Nunziato Carino, was 19 years old when he lost his own father, Francesco, to a brain tumor. Francesco was from Calabria, a southern region right in the toe of the Italian boot, and he was, like so many immigrants, a fiercely hard worker. He was a laborer for the snow removal crew in Long Island, where his family had settled. One particularly snowy day, he fell off a truck and fractured his skull. 7 years later, he started getting headaches, and doctors discovered an inoperable tumor. I know very little about my grandfather Francesco because my father almost never spoke of him. What I do know is that he taught his eldest boy, Nunziato, the value of hard work. Nunziato's first job was at age 12, shining shoes. He never stopped working from that day forward. After his father died, he went into the army and became an aerial gunner, flying 55 missions. While in the service, he faithfully sent $50 each month to his mother. He was 27 when he met my mother at a party. She was just 18, shy and quiet, and exceedingly lovely, and he walked right up and told her so. She demurred at first, but he persisted and soon swept her away. My grandmother Rosa, now called Rose, used the skills she had learned at the Maria Cristina di Savoia to sew a wedding dress for Marie, a brocade satin creation with long sleeves, a 15-foot train, a mandarin neckline, and tiny buttons all down the front. Marie and Nunziato wed in St. Hugh's Roman Catholic Church in Huntington Station, Long Island. They had what was known as a football wedding, named for the thick Italian hero sandwiches wrapped in cellophane for the reception. They were a young, beautiful couple, sprung from the immigrant experience and poised to start a new American adventure of their own. Their first daughter, Annette, was smart and thoughtful, and she was mature beyond her years. She was rational, reserved, a straight-A student. Their second daughter was different, a rebel, a jokester, carefree and questioning, so stubborn and argumentative her parents dubbed her Chatterbox. She had to have the last word, to the point where her mother and sisters would beg, "Please stop talking." She demanded answers, and she never left well enough alone. That daughter was me. Our childhood in Huntington Station was not one of material deprivation. We had plenty of food, comfortable beds, clean clothes, and toys we loved. In our first home, a brick ranch house my father built, Annette and I shared a corner bedroom with a double bed, rosebud wallpaper, crocheted comforters, and curtains with floral trim. Down the hall, Frank had his own room, while Nancy, still a baby, slept in a crib in my parents' bedroom. We all went to good schools, had good friends, and enjoyed a good measure of stability and routine. And like most families, we had pets, though the history of our animals is ramshackled at best. My father loved little creatures, starting with the Chihuahua he brought home from the war and that he took with him everywhere. However, our family pets seemed to come and go at an alarming rate. One of our earliest cats, Casey, got leukemia and died. Our Yorkie Terrier we named Michael got away and was hit by a car. We had a one-eyed black Persian cat that seemed happy enough to be with us, but when we got new furniture, the cat's shedding became a problem and he was given away. We also had a cute little golden Pomeranian who went missing during a snowstorm, and when the snow finally melted a few days later, we found the poor thing frozen to death by the back of our house. I never expected the pets we loved would be around long. It was just another thing I couldn't control. Looking back, it's surprising that the pets would never be safe in our house. The truth is, none of us were. My father liked to drink, and drinking changed who he was. I don't know precisely what happened when alcohol passes through the stomach into his bloodstream and finally hit his brain. I know alcohol dulls your senses and mental sharpness. I know it affects alertness and coordination, and I know in some people it causes anger and agitation. But what happened to my father was something different. Alcohol utterly transformed him. When my father was sober, he was one of the loveliest men you'd ever meet. Funny, generous, warm with loved ones, welcoming to strangers. To this day, people come up and tell me how wonderful he was. People I grew up with say, "I wish my father had been more like yours." But every day after his shift as a bartender at the Vitcher Lounge, it's as if he'd swapped clothes with some other man and sent him home in his place. My father liked Scotch whiskey, dwarves on the rocks, and he would drink during his shift and stay afterwards and drink some more. When he got into the car to drive home, what we called the dark cloud would come over him. His eyes got squinty, his face grew tight, and his normal, natural smile disappeared into a hard frown. The demons inside him would stew and percolate and rise to the surface, awaiting for the slightest trigger to explode. The trigger could be anything, even nothing. We never knew what it was that made him so angry on those car rides home, or what would set him off when he walked in. All we knew was that once my father's rages had started, they could not be stopped. Most nights we'd be in bed when he arrived at midnight or later. We'd listen for the telltale sounds, the way he slammed the front door or the clinking of ice in a glass in the kitchen, letting us know he wasn't done drinking. But sometimes there was no noise at all. Sometimes it would just start. My brother Frank would be sound asleep, and my father would appear in his bedroom, a dark figure in the doorway. And then he would scream and curse at the boy, as if Frank were a man he held some mortal grievance against. "Frank, you miserable, no good son of a bitch!" Frank, not yet 6, would jolt awake, then lay there still, cowering under the covers. 5 minutes of yelling. 10 minutes. It seemed like as if it would never end. And in the other room, Annette and I would hear it and hold each other for comfort. Down the hall, we could hear baby Nancy crying in her crib. My mother would not always rush in to stop him. She knew defending Frank would likely make the situation worse and earn both her and Frank even more abuse. But some nights the rages were so scary, it was impossible for her not to go in and protect her boy. Usually my father wouldn't stop until he exhausted himself, and then he'd slam the door, go drink some more, and finally, in the dead of the night, pass out. There was never a real reason for him to turn on my brother. Sometimes all it took was seeing something that made him think of Frankie. We were all subject to those rages, but most of the time they were aimed at my mother and Frankie. At dinner one night, Frankie simply asked my father to pass him a bowl of spaghetti. My father, drunk, grabbed it and threw it at him. Frankie just sat there, covered in sauce. Another night, my father picked up a package of 10 flying saucer ice cream sandwiches from Carville on his way home from work. He set them on the kitchen table, and I was so excited that for a moment I forgot our most important rule. Don't say anything that might provoke Dad. I announced, "I'm so excited I could eat them all by myself." I was 7 years old. It's something kids say. My father said, "Good. Now you're going to eat every one." The other children hurried away at this first sign of trouble, and my father sat down at the table and told me to start eating. My mother was at work and was not there to stop him. I got through one flying saucer, then two, then a third. Halfway through my fourth, I started sobbing. In the middle of the 6 or 7, I threw up. Satisfied, my father got up and walked away. The other sandwiches melted in the sink. No one dared to come for them after my punishment was over. We lived in absolute terror of pushing a trigger. When my father was at work, we frantically cleaned the house and tried to leave nothing out of place. Inevitably, we'd miss something, and that was all it took. When my father was home, we never spoke loudly, as if we spoke at all. In our bedroom, when Annette and I quarreled about something, we'd argue in whispers. If I got mad, I'd raise my voice, and Annette would beg me to be quiet. I'd speak louder until, out of terror, she conceded to the point and pulled the covers over her head. I won quite a few arguments that way. Watching my father go after someone else was always worse than when he targeted me. One Christmas, my mother bought him a handsome beige suede jacket. My father, sober, loved it and slipped it on, modeling it to my mother's delight. But the next day, drunk, he stuck the jacket in my mother's face. "What am I, a pimp?" Then he took those shearing scissors and cut the jacket into shreds. Worst of all was when he hit my mother. I couldn't bear to see him do it. I'd feel sick and panicked and utterly helpless. I was terrified that one day he'd go too far. There was one instance ingrained in my memory that has left an indelible mark. Annette and I were half asleep in bed when we heard yelling begin. I don't know what it was about. I seldom did. But it went on for a long time, subsiding, then rising again. I didn't hear my mother's voice, only my father's. Though these weren't arguments, they were blitzes. Then I heard a horrific crash, a sound of glass shattering. I was sure my father had thrown my mother through the big front window. Annette begged me to go and break up the fight. I was usually as scared as she was, but this time I was so worried for my mother that I ran into the living room screaming, "Mom! Mom!" When I got there, the window was intact. My father had thrown a brass lamp with a large glass shade across the room, shattering it. He also hurled a bowl of tomato sauce against a wall, and the green velvet sofa was covered in red. Chairs were overturned, and my mother was on the floor, bruised and bleeding. I ran to her, and to this day I remember the look of horror on her face. Not horror of having been hit, but horror of having me see her this way. Later that night, my father passed out. Annette comforted her. Poor little Frankie was too terrified to come out of his room. In the morning, my mother told us the same thing she always told us. Be normal. Act like nothing happened. The next day, we went to school.